This is Dr. James Crosby, Head of Sustainability at Advantage Utilities. I'd like to ask, could your organisation be more of an energy sector hero? Are you interested in improving your sustainability as a business? Well, now you can obtain the expert view and guidance on renewable energy solutions, on-site generation, carbon accounting, and sophisticated grid energy purchasing options through Advantage Utilities. Our team of experts use the latest tools to better analyze, track, and reduce your organization's energy usage and carbon emissions. To find out how Advantage Utilities can become your one-stop shop for all your energy and sustainability needs, please visit www.advantageutilities.com or give one of our passionate and friendly team a call on 0208 131 4747.
Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Andrew O'Donnell. Andrew has over 30 years experience in the energy sector and is currently working at Qatar Energy LNG. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi guys, just as Michelle has mentioned, my name is Andrew O'Donnell, commonly known as Drew. I've been working in this business since the late 80s, and I'm currently over in Qatar, where I've been for over the last 2 years, working for Qatar Energy LNG now on one of the largest projects for the offshore fields in Qatar, for CapEx probably in the region of about $4 billion.
So how did you get started off in the energy sector then?
Through my dad, originally. I left school and I got a job in a bank a long, long time ago. And my dad was working at NIG, Highland Fabricators as it was then, which was Brown and Root, part of the Brown and Root programme. And he had mentioned that there was some apprentices on the go, and they were looking for smart young kids. And I thought, you know what, I much prefer out and about and a bit more driven than sitting in the bank. So I took up the opportunity of starting an apprenticeship scheme back in the late 80s, 1998, and then sort of worked my way up, climbed my way up from there.
Okay. So did you find the apprenticeship helped you quite a lot then?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. You spent about 4 years on back then as it was. I started in the quality department, sort of doing a little bit of domestic control, a little bit of QA/QC inspection, a little bit of just general materials control, etc. And then we went into the drawing office for a bit, went into welding for a bit, and in the meantime, you're obviously doing some qualifications through, back then it was the Inverness College, as it was, or now I think it's like Highlands University or something like that. And we did the HNC and then moved on into HND in fabrication and welding, to give you some technical background. And it really made me understand how, in the fabrication side, how you take a project from what is the engineering design phase and through the fabrication to load out, which was very good. And it gave me exposure. I was luckily assigned to work on the Total Dunbar jacket. Back then it was one of the biggest to be installed, about 16,000 tons, just on the limit of what was the S7000 and the DB102, which was the largest lifting vessels at the time in the world. That was on their high end of installation capabilities. And got exposed out to France. I was asked to go and run the project for 3 months to get the mud mats on track and get them delivered on time. That was all a long time ago, back in 1992, before the industry had one of its 7-year dips where the oil price dropped well into the $30 mark.
Okay, so you mentioned before you're currently working in Qatar. Do you think working abroad has really helped your career?
To be honest with you, I don't think it's helped my career, as in, moving on to become CEO of a company. But I do think it's helped my cultural awareness and my life awareness, because it has exposed me to probably a lot of cultures that I would not normally have been exposed to had I stuck with perhaps maybe one or two companies and went along the career path towards, maybe senior director levels, etc., etc. I've worked in countries since I left NIG. After NIG, I joined what was the T&I, transport and installation companies such as Herima, Saipem, and I worked there for about 3 years before returning to university full time, and worked periodically through the T&I, primarily in the North Sea, as well as Highland Fabricators, again doing what was modelling and drawing office work to help pay for my university. And then I worked in a shipyard for 2 years. Then over into the drilling sector over in America, got exposed to what it was like, life would be like in America. And then went to the Middle East and worked the first time in the Middle East in Saudi Arabia. So got exposed to the Middle East there. And then after that, I was back in the UK for a little while before moving over to Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, back UK, then into Norway, then up towards Japan for a while, and then down to Thailand, and then back into Singapore for a long time, and then back into Ghana, and then Baku in Azerbaijan, and then over to Qatar. So it's allowed me to see the world, and at the same time understand how different cultures react and interact with each other, and I'll obviously become aware of cultural sensitivities and how to be. It's probably taught me to be a lot calmer when dealing with different types of cultures and individuals, etc.
Okay. It's a lot of travelling.
It certainly is.
It has been a lot of travelling. I think you've travelled more than me, actually. Do you think that travelling well, I was going to say, have you ever wanted to be a CEO? And do you think travelling has hampered that?
To be honest with you, I don't think. When I first started out in the energy sector and I was doing fabrication, I was very good at maths. And I really got a drive out of doing engineering and problem solving. And so a lot of my initial career was in the structural engineering, naval architecture, etc. And I was really keen on the design element, and make up your own little designs and solve problems. So I was very driven by that when I initially started. So I wasn't really too keen on the business side. In America, I kind of did a little bit of what was back then an executive MBA, just to get me a little bit more exposure into how to understand business. Because I thought when I came back to the UK, I would pursue a more career-driven path. But personal events kind of changed that. And as I then progressed through, again, full execution phases, because obviously when you're in the energy sector, particularly in upstream, probably the same for downstream, you go through the phases of concept, pre-feed and feed, then into the execution phase of EPC, then into the T&I phase, then into the hookup and commissioning phase. Then you go into operations, and then you go into decommissioning. And I was exposed a lot through my career through each one of those phases in one aspect or the other. But one of the things I started to become quite interested in was how contracts worked and the interpretation of contracts. So I then took up another bit of a qualification at the Metropolitan University in London, where I did a bit of a contracts degree, contracts postgrad, just to get, not to become a lawyer, but just to better understand how contracts were structured and how to interpret contracts to what would then ultimately be your goal when you were either executing it for the client or executing it for the contractor, because both of them have different drivers, you know.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. That sounds amazing, actually. So, what do you enjoy most about your career then?
Well, I mean, obviously, the travel has allowed me to meet a lot of wild and interesting people, experience a lot of different cities, different cultures. The thing that I do like about the role, particularly project driven, they can range depending on what you're in. If it was concept, it's a lot shorter, it's sort of like less than a year. But normally execution phases are maybe 18 months to 4 years. I really do like the challenge when it's a tight schedule to deliver a product that can meet the requirements, but at the same time gets delivered on time and as close to budget as is feasible. And touch wood, normally my projects that I'm involved in, they tend to be delivered within 15-20% of their original schedule, which is, I would say is quite a good ratio in this industry. So I would typically say that the thing that I enjoy most is the short term delivery rewards that you get. If you can deliver a project on time within 2 years, it's usually very good. But it does have its nerves because in this industry, I've been working as a contractor for a long time. You don't know where the next project is coming from along that line, but touch wood again, I've been very, very lucky.
How do you actually deal with that? Because I'm a contractor myself, and it can
Yeah,
be very stressful, especially when it's coming to the end of your contract. How do you deal with that, and how do you start to navigate your next project?
I think in when I was younger, it was a lot easier because when you're a single person, you're typically only dealing with yourself. So what was before was what are the drivers? You would look at where the location is, what is the monetary requirement, what is the career, and what is the project. If it was good money, it would probably outweigh the other three. If it was in a great location that you'd never been to before, you could factor in a little bit less. If there was a step up in your project or your career role, that would weigh heavily. And then obviously it's like if the project was something of interest, like maybe it was the first time something was being done or the biggest project that was going to be or something unique about it, that would obviously weigh heavily on the mind. Now, when I've got a family and a little son, I do find that I tend to look more for projects that are a little bit more longevity or in an area in which I know I'll be able to maintain longevity. So those type of decisions in the last few years have been towards the 3 year, 4 year projects rather than maybe an 18 month or a 2 year project. So those
Okay.
are the things that I try. I've kind of changed my what is or the priority on the criteria that I look for on the next role. But normally, when I'm coming up for a next role, it's usually towards the end of the project. I would like to think I have a little bit of ethics, so I never leave the project until the very end or until the contract's run out. And then I discuss with the client, okay, the project's come to the end. Is there anything that you have lined up? Is there anything of interest? We discuss what's going to happen. And then, if it's not of interest, the next phase or the contract, the terms and conditions are not what I'd like, I would then start to discuss with, as you do, your network and people that you've worked with before. Normally, I've done a decent enough job that I get employed by someone or referred to by someone who I've worked with.
Okay. So, what made you go down the contracting route rather than stay employed as a staff person?
There was sort of two events kind of triggered the route. The first was, as I talked about, was an apprentice. I was in NIG, Highland Fabricators, and I'd done my 4 years there. I then ended a prize at university. I got the college then. I got the top of the class prize. I was still a graduate when I was running. When they asked me to run the mud match for the Total Dunbar out in France, and I even had a sort of plaque handed to me by then the managing director KBR out of London, who was who came up to the yard to shake my hand and say, "You're the type of caliber of person we want working for our organisation," and all that type of stuff. And then the rundown came, and I was just a number on a sheet of paper. I was laid off, and the person who was basically standing in front of me in the queue to when they hand out the cards, he was kept on for the next 3 months. So it was kind of like first in, last out type of thing, you know. And I realised then that you have to drive your own career. Otherwise, if you wait for others to drive it for you, you'll either be sort of paid off or you'll get extremely disappointed. And then the next time I came round, I was working with a drilling contractor at the time, and I'd done very well. I'd driven down their O&M work scope that they had on their 6 drill rigs. They had something like 200 projects, mini projects, etc., that were outstanding either through upgrades or refurbishments, etc., that was laying stagnant, and I brought it down to 15 in a year. Either got them answers responded to or got them implemented. Some of them were obviously, no, you're not getting that. Some of them was about executing the job, engaging the subcontractors and getting them out onto the rigs to do the upgrades. And again, I got to the end of the year and I asked, okay, how does the company see their career path for me over the next 3 to 5 years? And it was kind of like, well, we'll just see how it's going to go and then we'll figure it out. And I thought, no. I was 35 at the time. And I thought, no, this is not the type of thing where I'm waiting for people to tell me that I'm doing a good job. So I left and decided that I'll basically follow my own path rather than waiting for people to move me up, you know.
I mean, that's an amazing story, right? And it's very commendable that you took control of your own career. But how do you typically go about doing that for a younger audience?
Oh, I think, as I say, for me, I basically identified four pillars or 4 criteria that I wanted to see what the role the company, the project would offer. One of them is obviously financial. The other one is location. The other one is what it's going to do for your career. And last but by no means least is what is the project or the company that you're going to move into. And then it's really just about assessing for that time you are in your life, what becomes the driver. Is it you want to see the world, then you choose location. If it's you want to put as much money in your bank as you can, then you choose money. If it's about moving up the ladder in the career, then obviously you take the one that gives you a bit more seniority. And if it's about the project or the company you want to be associated with, then obviously you make that decision. But it's about being flexible each time that decision comes around, because each time it might be a different criteria that's driving you.
Okay. But you were saying before, and just a minute ago as well, that you could actually get promoted being a contractor. A lot of people don't think that you can. Do you think that that's a myth, or do you think that you can still get promotion even when you're not a staff person?
Oh, yes. I mean, okay, you may not get, let's say you might not get into the corporate role. You might not be given, the CEO position or the CFO position or the department position, but you will be given the project positions. For instance, there are different types of contracts. That there's like staff contractor where you're engaged for a specific period, and there's ones that are associated with the project. But you can be promoted. You could go in as a senior engineer and then be promoted up to a lead, or be promoted up to, deputy project manager, or even project director, as I have been. So there are promotions within the contractor, but there is obviously a ceiling, which typically you don't go beyond maybe a project director role. So it's kind of like that. If you're, depending on where you want to fall and what interests you as in the younger audience, you want to actually make that decision whether you want to aim for CEO, CFOs, chief technical officer, or something like that, or whether you're happy around the execution part of projects where you're delivering and you have recognition every 2, 3, or 4 years because you've delivered a project well.
Okay. That's interesting. Thanks. I just wondered, have you ever had any career disasters and how did you handle them?
Oh, well, I mean, there's been a couple of times where there's been, safety incidents on the projects that I've been on. They have been a bit of an eye opener. But as far as technical career disasters, I'm just trying to think. I'd like to think. I'll tell you one. Pretty much I would say within my first 3 months of being an apprentice, and it was a great lesson learned. I was working in the domestic control department at NIG. I was learning about fit-ups. I don't know for your audience out there about jackets. Basically, jackets are structures that sit in the water and hold topsides on them. Typically anywhere up to about 140 meters or something like that. Probably we start getting into the deeper sections. For the North Seas, these were probably in the 100 meters. These jackets, they get built lying flat on the ground, and then they get rolled up to start to mate into what is a 4-leg, 6-leg, or 8-leg structure. So when it's lying on the ground, you'll have these vertical bracing tubulars that add part of the frame, and you have to cut them to size so that when it rolls up, you will have a perfect mate on the other side, so that the guys can start welding it and holding it together. So myself and who would have been my mentor at the time for that particular scope, went out and we were doing some calculations on the profile and the lengths and figuring out the datums. And obviously we were tight pushed to get it done late Thursday night because they planned to roll it up Friday morning. I was on the night shift, and he put down on the drawings what the measurement should be to cut. And I basically asked some questions about his calculations and where the datums and that were taken from, because I was still learning, but maybe something in the back of my head thought there was something wrong. And he basically told me, listen, Drew, he says, we're really pushed to get this out. So please, just sign it and let's move on and get it out. The calcs are correct. So I assumed he was correct. I signed it. They handed it into the fabrication team. Fabrication team went off and cut the brace. And that morning when they lifted it up, they have about maybe 8 different cranes, all lifting this large frame up, costing the yard a lot of money and time with all the people that are around. And the bracing didn't fit. They were actually cut too short. So they had to roll them down, cut off one of the cans, reset the cans, and then do it again. And that probably set that particular scope back about 3 weeks. So the manager at the time called myself and Angus into the office, and he turned around and he handed us both a written warning. I remember I'm only in the job 3 months. And Angus stood up for me and he says, look, it wasn't Andrew's fault. I told him to sign it. It was my fault. I took full responsibility in this, and I'm sorry. And Dave Spartan, who was my boss at the time, he basically says, well, this is a lesson for Andrew not to assume, because it'll make an ass of you and me. And it is something that I've carried throughout my career. Is I always do the checks, I always reset, and I always make sure everyone else never assumes that what's gone before is correct.
Okay. That's quite a big, that's quite a big lesson to be learnt, though.
Yes, yes, yes. Particularly when you've only been in the job 3 months.
Yeah,
But I was glad I did it. I was glad I did it then rather than like later in my career when maybe it was a bit more serious, about the assuming and the assumptions that go on in life.
yeah, I agree as well. I agree. So if you were going to hire someone, if you were going to hire a graduate,
Yeah.
typical skills would you look for?
Well, it depends. I mean, obviously, you would like them. I mean, one of the things that I learned about going back into uni a few times and studying is one of the things that worked well about getting a job first before I went to do higher education was that working 50, 60 hours a week was already built into you to actually sit through university and study 6, 8, 12 hours a day. And I'd probably say to graduates, that people who leave high school, is don't go to uni first, go get yourself a job doing something for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day to get you ready for university and the tests and exams and the studying that is going to dedicate a lot of your time. And if I was hiring a graduate, I would probably look for someone that had maybe that little bit of, they took a year out, they went and maybe traveled, they went and did some work abroad experience or work experience or internship before they went to uni or college. I'd look for someone who's, done reasonably well as far as qualification goes, but that doesn't necessarily give them, a right to, they'll actually be any good about the job. And then I would kind of look for, at the beginning, what are some of their world experience and what are some of their interests, and where they want to go. Because, certain people make out, they maybe start out in the wrong path or they have different expectations when they start where they want to go. And some companies are not the right fit for them, but they maybe get pushed down that road again, maybe because they're looking for something that's in the location. So to sort of like make it reasonably nice and short, is I'd look for someone who has a little bit of world experience before looking at what their qualification was, and I'd try and extract from them during an interview what they hope to achieve out the next 3 to 4 years of starting a project or starting on with a company, just to make sure it's the right fit and this is going to get them what they expect at the end of that 3 to 4 years.
Okay, that's interesting because that's the first answer like that I've ever had. Normally a lot of people talk about how soft skills are important. Do you really think it is important to get a job before going to university? I mean, I did the
I,
same, so
yeah, for me, just I know how it benefited me because I saw a lot of the students that were around me who basically came straight from school and went to college, went to university, and for them to spend 3 hours in the study hall and another 3 hours back in your dorm room, and when it came to the exams, spending 6, 8, 10 hours at a time studying for the exam, it was just too much for them. But because I'd been doing that since I was 18, for me to spend 10 hours sort of just going over past exams or reading books, it was probably a lot easier. And you just break it down into set blocks. You get up in the morning, you go for a run, you do 3 hours, you go have a couple hours lunch, you do another 3 hours, you go have some dinner, you do another 3 hours, and then you go out and have a party a bit with your friends, and then restart again the next day, and away you go.
okay. Do you think a lot of the younger people struggle when they go to the uni straight out from school? Then
I do. I mean, I'm not saying the ones that I did, but just when it came to the exams, because sometimes you go from school where you're probably not studying as much as you do at university, and then the next time when you're getting tasked to the pressure it is to pass the exams and move into the next year, it can be quite daunting for a lot. or maybe they've just went to university for the sake of it. But I do think that if you take that little year out to assess whether it's a holiday, whether it's a working holiday, an internship, just to see where you want to be, then you realize, okay, getting a degree will not necessarily. I might not do the work that I'm qualified in as far as qualifications, but it will set me on a better path than what it is than not having a degree. And I think it's just that little time out that allows you to reset. It gives you a little bit more focus when you end up going back to university or go to university for the first time.
Okay, that's good advice, actually. So, what is next for you? What do you see your next role being?
I would like to say this. My next role was the role I'm in right now, which is basically to make sure my little boy is happy and give him a little bit of an easier life than maybe I had when I grew up. But I would like to think that when my contract's up for renewal in the next couple of years, it will be a turning point where the next 4 year project will be, I'll just move into. And if it happens to be in Qatar, then great. If it happens to be somewhere else, then it'll be somewhere else where my family have been fully engaged in the discussion. And it'll be somewhere else where it'll enhance our life for the next 4 years. And then hopefully that'll take me up to when I'm about 60. I'll look to retire, and when my little boy is getting closer to the end of his second year, I'll definitely look to retire when he's heading off to university.
Okay, that sounds amazing. So, have you any advice to give our younger audience about starting off in the energy sector?
In the energy sector, okay, well, I mean, obviously, oil and gas sometimes can be the bad word that it is, where we talk more about renewables and wind and hydrogen and solar, etc. Is the way to save the climate. But I also think that the energy sector in a sense still has as far as oil and gas goes, has a large part to play, particularly if we can do it a bit cleaner, if we can provide a bit more, I would say, ability to extract things cleaner and without harming the environment as much as we do. But we also have to remember, when I lived in Azerbaijan and they were putting up the wind farms like they were going out of fashion. And these large wind farms were just basically taking over the whole of their coastline. And there are a lot of studies that go into how that then affects the migration of animals, etc., and all that type of thing. So it's one of those things where whatever we do in the energy sector, we need to do it that we're going to make a difference in 20, 30 years. Whether that's cleaning up oil and gas or whether that's making the wind and the solar and the renewables a lot better for the environment and the habitats that we're living in, then that's what we should try and do. Because, the oil and gas isn't going to end tomorrow. It's still got 30, 40 years left. There's still large projects that are being signed up today for multi-billion-dollar gas programs or oil and gas programs that have 20, 30, 40 years left, and people have to operate them. So it's really about making a difference for 40 years and making it cleaner as we go along.
Okay, that's excellent. Excellent advice. So I was going to ask you maybe one final question. If you could go back in time, what piece of advice would you give your younger self?
Stick with football. You could have made it. Sorry. So if I was going back in time, what would I have done slightly differently? I would have probably talked to myself about not being so disappointed when I was paid off for the first time at NIG, just being graduated, and the nervousness that came with it about finding the next role, etc. Because it would have maybe allowed me to look for something better earlier, or maybe have changed my tact. But I would have just told myself, don't be so nervous about being paid off the first time. There is always other opportunities just a little bit further down the road.
I think that's good advice, actually. That is very good advice. So, I was going to maybe ask you one more question. How did you actually survive being made redundant at such a young age, though?
Oh, I was about 21 at the time. I don't know if you made your way up to Invergordon and the Rossshire in your career, Michelle, but it's quite a small town, small communities, etc. And everybody knows everybody. So I kind of played football for a little bit. And back then there wasn't the internet. It wasn't the web wasn't sort of fully flowing. You looked in the papers to find work. You looked on the yellow pages to find work. You then looked through the companies that were of interest to you on those yellow pages. You then wrote cold letters to the HR department to actually, I wouldn't like to say beg for work, but beg for an opportunity is probably the correct term. And you put stamps on envelopes, and you sent out 10 or 20 letters a week. Initially starting off with your local area, and then I expanded further afield to likes of Aberdeen and London and Glasgow, just by looking on the yellow pages that we had, and took it from there. So a lot of the time when I got paid off was sort of being around my family. They supported me, enjoying the time off, playing football and golf and sports and that type of thing, and doing a bit of exercise. And then at least 20 hours a week was about writing letters by hand, because we didn't have personal computers and printers back then. You could do it on a typewriter if you were that way inclined. But primarily because I came from a working class family, most of my letters and CVs were all done by hand. And then I think after a year or so, I managed to do one on Word, got it printed, and then made some copies of that. So it was a hard slog at the beginning, but I would say it was a lot down to my family and that would make it nice and easy, and the friends and activities I had after the non-responses from a lot of companies come in, But then I was lucky enough to get an opportunity by a small T&I company, or subcontractor to T&I company, who got me a start in with the time Herima on the 102, and I became an installation engineer, and away I went.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so all I would tell everyone out there is, you don't know how lucky it is that you've got computers, printers and scanners and emails,
I think it is, and I was just smiling when you were talking about that, because I do remember that as well, having to send spec letters by hand.
Yes. And your handwriting was, I didn't realise how bad my handwriting had gotten until I wrote a get well soon card to someone, and I was like, oh my God, that is so bad.
It is much easier nowadays with your computers and the internet now.
Very much so.
It is. Okay, that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Andrew for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Michelle.
That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts, and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.